Anybody can answer my question. President Obama took a very rare initiative during the first year of his presidency as an American president, that he appointed Senator George Mitchell as the special envoy for Middle East, which was something very rare. And I would like to know, after this election where Republicans have regained majority in the House of Representatives in a big way, how it would impact the initiative and how it would impact the ability of President Obama's administration to be effective. And what do you think, knowing the past, the fate of negotiations in the past, the fate of dialogues in the past between the Palestinians and the Israelis, how optimistic, pessimistic, or what degree of guarded optimism you have? Thank you very much.
Well, on that one, I think you're asking a very important question. I don't know if we know all the answers yet, coming right after the midterms. I think I just saw something of Richard Haas, and I agree with him, which is that the congressional dimension is best suited to deal with budgets, appointments, and treaties. And there are different schools on how a Republican takeover of the House is going to impact U.S. policy. There's different views. Some say it'll be a profound constraint because Obama will need the Republicans on other issues, and they will be more difficult on dealing with some of his initiatives. Others will say they will so throttle his domestic initiatives that he will become 100% foreign policy president. I tend to think the third year of American presidential trajectories is one usually of activism. I tend to think he will not feel constrained, but we shall see. But there is an area that I'm very concerned about, and I alluded to very briefly in my remarks, and I didn't want to dwell on it because of the lack of time. And no one's written about this yet, but I'm sure they will. And that is the funding of the Palestinian Authority in the U.S. Congress. I think you had a few people who were passionately committed to it. A fellow by the name of Howard Berman, who's the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee. A woman by the name of Nita Lowey, who is the head of what's called the Senate Foreign Operations Committee. That's the Foreign Aid Committee in the House. Those are two people who really took this issue on. They also supported General Dayton's effort to equip and train Palestinian security forces, and they just now, I think they're up to over 3,000 people that they've trained. And the security situation is fantastic on the ground, better than it's ever been in its history. I'm worried about that these programs are going to come under political pressure. That Fayyad, who everyone sees, and the Israelis too, is very accountable, who's trying to create a culture of accountability and replace Arafat's maybe culture of victimhood, that his ideas might not win the same resonance on the Republican side, although they should, because of the same ideas of accountability and transparency are those that Republicans say they support. So I would hope if they got to know him, they would support him. But what I wonder about is an across-the-board slashing of foreign aid that is not directed against the Palestinians, of course, but is across the board where they will be hurt. The program, the USCC, with the U.S. security effort of Dayton, now General Mueller will be hurt. And I think that we should not let that happen. I think it's too important. That's all.
Yeah. Yost, do you want to add anything on the Iraq issue on that, Ed?
Well, simply following up.
Or any of you, since that was an open question, it's sort of a large issue.
No. I think President Obama made a very wise decision when he came into office. He invested his presidency immediately on trying to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. He appointed George Mitchell at the outset. I think he took a page of lessons learned from both the George W. and the Bill Clinton administrations, where his two predecessors got engaged on Arab-Israeli conflict resolution, but very late in their mandates. So that was smart. I think his political intuition is right on this one. I think his political instincts, his intellectual instincts are right on this one. He wants to try to be the American president who can bring this together. I hope that he will not be discouraged because of the elections, and that he will follow his political instincts and not listen to all the naysayers. For God knows there are so many reasons not to get engaged. But what do you aspire to political power and leadership for? What is your legacy? And it's better to try, and I hope that he will persevere on trying to be the broker on an Israeli-Palestinian, hopefully a more comprehensive agreement.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, sorry. Speaking of special envoys, I just wanted to note the absence of a special envoy for Iraq. The task has been given essentially to Vice President Joe Biden, who has many other things on his plate. He's dealt with the Iraq file ably, I would say, but Iraq deserves more attention than it is getting. We're facing a year in which there ought to be a responsible exit strategy. So far, we have a deadline. We have an intent to withdraw, but really no strategy. And I think it would require the efforts of a specially dedicated U.S. envoy to help navigate this very, very difficult process. One, and two, I would also say that special efforts would have to be directed toward one of the key fault lines in Iraq, the Arab-Kurdish one, and centered on the question of Kirkuk. It would be really very important for the United States to have a vision as to how to address this question before and after the withdrawal of American troops next year.
The big problem in Afghanistan now is the Taliban and the support they're getting from Pakistan. And the news reports that President Obama is heading to on an Asia trip starting in India, where he's going to give them or arrange the sale of a large number of C-130s and C-5s. It just seems to me that that's the worst possible signal to send to Pakistan, who we want to cooperate with us in cracking down on the Taliban, just in terms of making them totally paranoid about Indian capabilities to project power into Afghanistan. That's the question. Would you agree with my assessment?
Yes, the president's going to India. It's a very important relationship, but that's only part of the equation. Don't forget all the military aid and economic aid we're giving to Pakistan and the strong support we're giving to that government. So the Pakistanis cannot consider this a zero-sum game. Pakistan is being very, very heavily supported by the United States politically, economically, and militarily. What I tried to say in my brief remarks is that we have to connect the dots. The Obama administration connect the dots. We shouldn't segment our policy in bilateral prisms. It's not U.S.-India only, U.S.-Pakistan only. It's U.S. with South Asia, with the Kashmir issue is something we should nudge them along. They don't want us to, but we should be nudging them along on that, because Kashmir is the one issue that can bring these two nuclear powers to war, India and Pakistan. And therefore, I hope the president's trip to India will build up our credit in India so that he can use it in a more strategic framework on Afghanistan.
I would point out there is an entire panel dedicated to Afghanistan, Pakistan this afternoon, which I think they will get into a number of these issues in a great deal of depth.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Is there anything the president can do in India on Kashmir in this trip?
Again, I think we could probably, there is going to be a panel in the afternoon on Afghanistan, Pakistan, which will get into India and the president's trip, so.
Hi, yes. Back here. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, given what's happened in the last week and a half with the Virginia bomber and the Yemen packages, do you think American foreign policy should change towards the Middle East and Yemen?
Well, I think our moderator is best positioned to answer that, since she was our ambassador to Yemen.
We'll talk about that later. That's separate from this panel. I can't do Yemen in 2 or 3 sentences, but.
Shadi Dirani, Lebanese Information Center. My question is to Susan and Ambassador Jerjian. Susan, you mentioned something about a lot of talks in Washington these days about a war. And Ambassador, you also commented on the issue of sending an ambassador to Syria. Now, these two issues really affect the majority pro-freedom, pro-democracy Lebanese people, where they feel that there is a threat on the Lebanese state these days from an approaching war, and it looks like the administration has a lot of tactics and less strategies. So how would you address the Lebanese fear, and what should or could be done to avoid it?
Okay.
I will try to answer the Iran component of your question, if there was one. And let me try to be more clear. I don't endorse the idea of military action toward Iran to deal with a nuclear issue or to deal with the broader Iranian threat around the region. Nor, frankly, do I think it's a likely outcome from this administration, even with more pressure from a Republican-dominated House. So, I think it's difficult to tamp down this talk, in part because, as I said, no administration is ever going to take the prospect of military action off the table, nor should they. But, it is much more, I think, an issue that gets bandied about by journalists, by think tanks, by people who, like us, have the luxury of engaging in the hypothetical. The administration at this point, as far as their public statements are concerned, as far as everything that I think we can see in reading the tea leaves of what their actions are really gearing up for more diplomacy on Iran. Some of that diplomacy will incorporate negotiations, hopefully successful ones. Some of that diplomacy may incorporate more sanctions and more international pressure on Iran. I don't see an administration at this stage which is gearing up to war. I think much of the media and punditry talk about the prospects and even the likelihood of war, either from the US or from Israel toward Iran, is an overreaction to what happened with Iraq. And while I understand that kind of an overreaction, I think it is unfortunate because it skews the discourse and it eliminates, as I said, the concern about what I see to be one of the more likely outcomes of our current policy course, a very long and frustrating increasing isolation of Iran, which does not produce a better outcome in the long term for any of the issues that we have on the agenda here today or for Lebanon.